Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and yeah, actually I'm from Poland, but this is my first time here in Wrocław, if you can believe it. It's a beautiful city, and as it was mentioned, it's my first ever public tech conference talk as well. So a lot of things to be excited. A bit stressed, but I hope I'll give you a good example to next year be in my position. Okay, so today we'll be talking about a multi-region data governance in Rails application. That's the name of the talk that I submitted it. I lied. I lied not with bad intentions, but I think the topic that I chose, it's quite wide. We'll get in a second what exactly multi-region is. However, because this is such a wide topic, I decided to focus on a very specific aspect of that multi-region data governance, and actually about moving from having a single, just what small technical glitches at the beginning. Doesn't work, obviously. Okay, yeah. Nope. Yes. Cool. Okay, so we're going to speak about a specific case about moving from having a single region multi-tenant application to a multi-region multi-tenant application. Yes, and I know a year ago there was a really good talk about the multi-tenant. This year we're going a step further and we're going from multi-tenant to multi-region multi-tenant. So let's get started. And today's story will be actually about a success, about things that all the people that build applications actually dream about. Because you yourself, as entrepreneurs or developers, you build applications to, at the end, maybe earn money, create business value to the clients. And today's story, the reason why we even talk about the multi-region is because of a story of success, about the idea that picks up and then creates the problem that we're going to solve later. So let's imagine an entrepreneur that kind of has an idea. And for the sake of the example, let's assume that that person thought about a SaaS application to host merchants and allow them to build shops so their clients can buy stuff through their system. Yeah. They recognized the market, they saw the opportunity. And that idea grew in an entrepreneur's mind. And in order to go from idea to actual application, you need to kind of grow that seed and build the thing that you imagined. And what's the best way to do it in the web framework environment? Rails new command, yeah. And yeah, it's so cool. Okay, and by the way, this is my first talk, so I kind of imagine like people would just stand up and standing over. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so we're going from an idea to actual implementation. And well, we have our neighbor who actually sells some stuff through the internet, so maybe let's get him on the platform. And he agrees, and he picks up and creates a shop. And there are people who actually go to that shop and start to buy things in our application. There are users that start to use the shop on our platform. And then the word spreads out, there are new clients, and there are more and more and more people and more clients in those shops who join the platform. Yay, I think it picks up. We have clients. And then you kind of start to see, maybe there is more potential for my platform, so let's move and attack other markets. Let's grow globally. And that's what you do. Initially, you were just based in, let's say, United Kingdom, but you see a market at this in States, in USA. So what you do is to start bringing clients in another country, in another region. And the shops start to pick up, and there are clients there as well. But what happens is this development is organic. So you're still that entrepreneur who had this idea, and you build that application, and it was built in the place where you were close, which was United Kingdom. So it's still not not really separated. All your data is still where it was initially, but you grew globally. And now you start to face a problem because there is a big client. There are a lot of actually big clients who say, okay, yeah, I'm going to join your platform. However, I have a requirement for you. You need to store data in the region where I'm from. I don't want to have my data across the ocean. I don't want to have it, I'm from USA. I want to have my data here, not on the servers in England. So you end up with a situation where kind of the initial setup with data being stored in UK is no longer valid. And you actually want to have the need from the clients is to have their data in the place where they're originally from. This is a cause of your success. This is because you grew globally. So now the question is, how do you do that? How do you move from having that single multi-tenant, because we had multiple clients, to multi-region, multi-tenant application? And this is what we'll discover today during our talk. And this is exactly the problem we, a team in Apply4, faced. And yeah, we don't build shops, actually. We are a permitting SaaS application for film and event industry. And my name is Miron. I work in Apply4 through Secret Source. And the reason why I mention two companies, because sometimes it's difficult to find a good one job. I was privileged to find two really good jobs. One with a fantastic product in the growing market. The second with an office in a place like this. So in Gran Canaria, so it's kind of not bad. But don't worry, I'm not going to leave the beautiful dark November of Poland. It's coming in a month. Getting back to the business. So we are Apply4, and we build this permitting SaaS platform for, like I said, for film and event industries. And our clients are authorities in UK, Canada, States, and in New Zealand. Authorities that allow people to have their events or filming shoots held in their city. For example, to block the streets in order to have a safe event. And our end users, the people who actually go into tenants, are even film producers or event organizers. And kind of the example that I started with, the shops, it matches our case, matches the SaaS application that we have, but instead of shops, in our case, what we have are authorities. So the tenant in our setup are authorities, and this is the only difference to the example that I started with. And the problem that I mentioned, it's exactly what we faced. Our US clients decided that they no longer can support the architecture in which their data is in UK and required us to move to the US, to move their data into US. And that brings us on a journey of a multi-region. How do you do that? How do you actually implement that in a real system? So what's the goal of this change? Kind of we're thinking about conceptually about moving data from one region to another. What does it mean? It means that the data which was of the clients, which was stored previously in one region in UK, suddenly needs to end up in a different infrastructure on a different side of the ocean. And let's talk kind of details now. So we have our United Kingdom. That's where we initially stored the data of our clients. That's where our initial clients are from. And then we have this new infrastructure in the US that we want to introduce and separate the data and place it there. And this setup is, as you can see, first of all, it's multi-tenant because we have multiple clients operating within an application, clients with their own users. And then we add this additional layer of a multi-region. So we, instead of having one multi-tenant application, we suddenly have two. And that's why that's what I mean when I use this expression of a multi-region, multi-tenant. and kind of going back to the fact that we had a talk yesterday about the multi-tenant. Yeah, I think kind of next year, and yeah, maybe in 10 years, yeah, we'll end up in this. So a lot of potential for future talks. Yeah, good. Yeah. That was okay. I'll work on it. Details. So what exactly is data? I mentioned the data. We need to move one thing from one place to other. What actually is data? In our case, we're talking about database records and files that were uploaded by the users and stored in the region. And to kind of give you a bit more context, I'm going to mention just quickly, briefly, the stack that we use. So you have a picture of the infrastructure that we have to deal with. So we have our Ruby on Rails application in a container deployed to EC2 AWS service. We're using AWS, but it doesn't really matter what you use. And then we have our data persistent layer that consists of database, consists of file system, and consists of Redis, so you can store data. And these are kind of the pieces of infrastructure, plus on top, DNS on load balancer that allows you to connect your application to the outer world. I mentioned this because we'll actually use it, but not that detailed in the future. It's not about infrastructure today. Okay, so when you think about that multi-region, multi-tenant setup, what options do you have? What type of architectures you can implement and use to make it kind of satisfy the requirement from the users? So one option is to keep having just one application, but separate the data layer, the data persistence layer. So you end up with something like this, where the data is kind of clearly separated. However, the complexity is that the application takes the challenge of actually going and picking the right data for the region. So a lot of complexity about this multi-region now lays in your application. And there's a lot going on in applications. There's a whole domain to be modeled and implemented. So do you really want to implement another really challenging concept into your system? And the other option is to actually separate applications completely. That means go from one application, from one data persistent layer, to two different separate ones. And then there is the option number 3, which is sort of a hybrid option, where, okay, you separate the application, you separate the data, but then you have something in between that is shared between the two regions to kind of handle the data that is required by both applications. And it depends on the case. So I'm going to now tell you why we picked one of the options, but for your applications, when you'll be facing this challenge in the future, you have to pick what kind of works best for you. To help you with that, I have a set of questions. So the first one is, can tenants move across the regions? So and how much data is shared between the regions? So how often do you need to synchronize the data between the regions? And also, the third thing is, can users operate in different tenants across regions? And the answers for us, as we kind of found out, is no, tenants don't move across regions. I mean, it's difficult to change a country like between the oceans, so kind of we're pretty safe in that regard. Secondly, how much data is shared? We found out that not much, and there is a bit that needs to be put into two regions, but we are okay with kind of going two different roads for that specific piece of data. And thirdly, can users operate in different regions? Yes, they can, but it's not really supported. It's not expected to apply for event across the ocean, because you're most probably doing your work in the region that is closest to you. For that reason, our big decision was just separate completely. So that was the decision that we made, and that's what we followed with. So to kind of just understand, we go from this one single application to that consists data from both regions. And by the way, the colors, I know it's not that clear, unfortunately, to some problems, but there is kind of two different flavors to the data. Please pay attention to that because I'm trying to mark exactly where the data is with those colors. So if something is of a color, that means it's physically in that country in general, which can be beautifully we can beautifully see here where those applications are physically stored in two different regions. Okay, so then you start to think what I need to do, what actual task I need to do to end up in this situation. Well, you need to separate your infrastructure, you need to separate your data, you need to move the data to the correct region, you need to adjust your Rails application to support two different regions, you need to get users to that correct region because they were using one application, now they have two. That's a lot. That's a lot of work. And it kind of, when you think about it, seems daunting. And when I was kind of thinking of the challenge of this, I had this picture in my mind. Maybe some of you recognize this aspect of, jumping. I think it's called leap of faith, something like this. And kind of if you implement this at once and just, deploy and close your eyes and jump, well, I think, that little haystack waiting underneath, like it's quite small and it's pretty difficult to actually pull it off like Assassin did. So what I suggest is maybe, stairs, and let's just walk down step by step by step. And this is what I really recommend. And this is the first tip that I'm going to give you, to do the change gradually. Do the steps until you're on the bottom, until you deploy the change. And that will probably give you a better chance to actually finishing it with success. But it's based on a real example. So actually, I have the stages that we did to get to this situation to actually separate the data. And we separate it into two stages. The one is redirecting users to the correct region and then actually separating the data. So the first part is keeping the data, not touching it at all, in one region. Create a situation where we already have two applications, two different URLs. So we're splitting the application, but kind of not touching the database at all, not touching the data persistent at all. And then in the second step, only then, separate the data and move the application to the other region. As you can see, after the step one, we still have applications in our original UK region. So how do you do that first step? How do you redirect users to the correct region? Conceptually, what we implementing here is we're splitting up our application. Previously, we had one application, and now we go into two applications suddenly. It's quite a big change for users, actually. So yeah, conceptually, it looks like that. And for the context, so you are aware what we're dealing here with is the infrastructure looks like this. So we keep the data persistent as it was, but what we do is we create additional containers and load balancers, which will come handy in a second. And that's kind of the infrastructure after step one. What's really important here is that the business requirement is to make it seamless for the user to go from using one application, going to one single URL, let's say app.applyfor.com, and suddenly be in the world where there are two different applications and they need to choose to which application they need to go. And the business requirement is to make it as seamless for the users as possible. And some of you might think, like, why are you using app1 and app2, not, for example, uk.applyfor.com or North America applyfor.com? It's a very good question. again, it depends on the situation that you're working on. In our case, although it's quite vague and doesn't provide you information where that region is based, it allows you to move around the countries that are included in the region. So it gives you more flexibility, and it made sense for us to go for that specific naming. But yeah, it might not work for you. So in terms of business requirement that we're implementing, we want to get users seamlessly from app.apply for the region agnostic URL to a region specific URL. So thinking about in kind of what is happening, whenever you send a request to a region agnostic, you want to have a redirect to region specific. And ideally, that redirect is correct, and kind of the data that you're trying to reach is there. So let's now kind of think, what tools do we have to achieve that? What can we do to make that process seamless? And the answer is we have two things that we can utilize and will utilize. DNS and load balancer. And from DNS, we're going to use a very, very specific feature of it, which is geolocation. Yeah, it's specific for Route 53. I'm not sure about other providers, but I think there should be option there as well. But essentially, DNS can resolve your IP based on where the origin IP is from. So when you send a request from UK, the IP behind the URL will be based on what you put in the rule. And the second feature is from load balancer. So you can make redirects based on path patterns. So depending on what's included in the path, you can make a decision where to redirect specific requests. In our case, it was handy because we have country in the URLs. Sometimes it's kind of makes the URLs too long, but in this case, it was very useful because we had this information about the country, and that means a region, about the region in the URL. And that's what we did. We defined the DNS in a way that if the origin of the request is from North America, go to load balancer 2, otherwise go to load balancer 1. It's not happening per request because DNS, it's cached what the result of the resolvement. However, it works because it kind of points you to the right load balancer. So then when you are handled by a load balancer, in a load balancer, by default, you go to the URL from that region. So if you're in load balancer 1, you go to app 1. You're redirected to app 1. If you're in load balancer 2, you go to app 2. Easy. But there are cases where you want to override that behavior. And this is where you have information in the URL that for some reason you are not in the correct load balancer. You should be in the other one. And that's where we use the feature of a load balancer that it kind of picks the first rule that applies. And we try to find those paths that include the country that is not in the right region and redirect it to the other one. And that's how we kind of allow users to seamlessly go to the right region. Note here, the case that I described applies for a 301 HTTP response. But actually, we had problems with it because it was cached quite aggressively by Chrome. So actually, we ended up with using 302. It's not perfect from HTTP semantics, but yeah, it worked, and kind of sharing this pain with you. And just to clarify, when we reach kind of the actual app 1, the region-specific request, nothing complicated happens here. We have a simple DNS record, and we go app 1 goes to load balancer 1, app 2 to load balancer 2, and then we go straight to the application, which handles all the requests for a region-specific URL. And one last point for you to remember, don't forget about SEO. So set what's called alternate links to point, when you have those two applications, that point to each other. There's a feature that you need to kind of code that you need to add to your header to actually, when you have two regions, to point each other. So kind of both of them know about the existence of the other one. And the end result of a stage one is that we end up with same data, two applications, two different paths. Good. We made our first progress. We actually, like halfway down the stairs, nothing broke. Users start to use app 1 and app 2 seamlessly. We control that. They can always reach the data because we haven't split anything yet. So now let's separate the data. And this is where a real task and challenge is hiding. So yeah, conceptually we move from kind of having this one data persistence layer with different pieces of data belonging to different regions, and we want to end up in completely separated applications. And when I mean separated, again, for a context, infrastructure-wise, we separate everything. So we create a second copy of database, EFS, like file storage, Redis. They are completely independent. They don't know anything about each other. So now we need to challenge the task of actually splitting our data. How do we split our database? This is a beautiful picture of a database with tables in it and a record in a table. Just to kind of be sure that we know what this picture looks like. So yeah, we have our database, and essentially the records belong to different regions. They should end up in different places because that's what the requirement was from our clients. So we want to separate it and put it in the two different databases. And in order to even start that separation, first thing to do, you just need to categorize your tables. So some tables have to be shared because the data in them is required by both applications to operate. It depends how often it changes, so you need to think how to synchronize the data. But this is kind of first thing you do. You categorize the table to shared ones or the tables that actually include data records from both regions. And then when you select those tables that kind of have data records from both regions, then you need to take it and separate a specific table. So yeah, to put the data in the correct region. And this is the process, I love this name, that we called bucketing. In the process of development, sometimes you come up with like really cool names that stick. And we came up now with this graphic, which is also even cooler, because conceptually that's what you do. You put records in the buckets that will be moved to their final destination. And what you do is just kind of assign each record to the correct bucket until you have all of the records assigned. And this is kind of conceptually, you think, okay, this record should go there. So let's now talk about actual implementation. What we did, we added a column bucket to our tables, to all of them. And this is just a simple integer column that's added and kind of represents to which bucket the record should be put in. And here is the code that actually makes it implement. It uses a feature, this is a Rails code that defines an enum that has the bucket value. So it's either not defined, so we haven't bucketed yet, region 1, region 2, or shared. And we included for all our models, so you kind of include in the base class. It's not really great to do it on a regular basis, but I think our use case is, justifies that. We're half an hour into the presentation, and this is the first time I show Ruby code at a Ruby conference. Finally. That's cool. Okay, so we have this column in our tables. So how do we actually assign that bucket value? How do we put a record into a bucket? And here, a bit of kind of knowledge about your domain, about your system comes really, really handy. We had our authorities, kind of conceptually, they belong to a country. They are in a country, but they have a concrete implementation in the code. There is a model called authority that has an attribute country that has a value, for example, UK or USA, that kind of indicates where this authority entry belongs to. And starting from this, you start to build the associations related to that authority. And it depends on your system. In our case, the application, this is what people, the event organizers use to get a permit. Then you get further kind of entities connected to the application, etc., etc. But I think the most important thing is you end up with this kind of tree-like structure with a root of authority from which you kind of have all those entries to start to pan out. And then you need to decide, for example, on the leaf level, to which region that specific record belong. We see kind of clearly connection, so we know that we can kind of decide based on connection to the authority where to put it, but how we actually reach that. And there are two ways. The first one is bottom up. So you start from the leaf level, you have this tree of associations, and you go kind of one level up until you reach the authority. So first, you go up, no, it's not the authority. You go up, no, it's not the authority. Finally, you reach the authority, and that gives you information to which region that record should be put in. However, there's a different approach, the top-down approach, where you start from authority. We know where to bucket authority because it belongs to one country. And then you go level, one level below, and kind of we know already to which bucket place them because we start from authority. And until you reach that leaf level, and at that point we'll also know to which region that leaf should be placed into. And this is a tip from the practice. The top-down approach worked a lot better in terms of how complicated it was to implement and how efficient it was to actually do the job, so bucket records. But although it's better, like it doesn't mean it's nice or clean. This is a view of our authority associations with quite a lot of with quite a lot of associations, has many, because we had to reach to basically all of the tables in our system. There's a lot more. We'll need to remove that later, but just to give you a view of how it looks like. And then what you do is iterate through each authority, through all of the association of that authority, and you update records in that association to the bucket value that you have from the authority. Yeah, that's simple, right? So this is how you can efficiently assign buckets to the authority, and you end up with a beautifully separated table with a bucket filled for every record. So you separated the data, and now there's a really, really cool feature that you can do, is because you have assigned the records to your to regions, you can preview how a region will look like, because you can just query all the data that will be later used in that specific region. And you can use it by, I think, dreaded by many, default scope method, probably rightly so. But again, in this case, it just works like a charm, because what you do is you define a default scope that takes all the records only from that specific region. So, as you can see, there are usages for things that are not recommended generally. And then, when you test and everything is corrected, how do you actually separate the database and worry not, I have advice on that as well. What you can do is, instead of making a copy or deleting the correct records, what we found is the best to work is to create a copy, like an empty copy of your table, and put only the records that you want there to be placed. And then swap the names, and in that way, the authorities table, which was on the left, is now authorities old. The correct region that you wanted to have on the right, you delete it, and you end up with a beautifully separated table. And that's how you can achieve quite efficient separation of tables. Just for you to know, be aware of constraints and auto-increment values. These are things that you need to look out for. So be sure that it's covered in your application. And also, a good advice, if you do this, remember you can provide a buffer in one of the regions, for example, 10% of all of the records, just to make sure that for some period of time there is no clash of IDs in your database, because you'll have two databases in two regions. Give yourself a bit of time to things go wrong. So yeah, that's advice. That's another advice for you to remember. And the end result of database separation, we end up with nicely separated data. And then file split up, which is kind of the last piece of data that we need to separate. We have files which are in some directory, and they do belong to some region. We can figure this out by the association to which that file belongs, similar to what we did with the records. And you basically want to recreate what you did with database, in the sense that you have this bunch of files that belong to different regions, and we want to extract them. So the file system in region 1 includes only data from that region. And in order to do that, you can you have the file which belongs to a region because of its association, or kind of to which record it was uploaded, but there is kind of no clue in that path to which region it belongs. What you can do is change the path for that file and add information about the region to the path where the file is stored. So suddenly you have a kind of a parent folder that tells you where to put the files in that region, although file didn't really change, only the path to it changed. And that's the way you can quickly then move the whole folders and place the files where they belong to. And for testing copying of the files, you can actually use empty copy of files, especially if you have millions of records. It's very useful to just create empty copy for each file that you have in your system, and then run tests on those files. In terms of that move, what you can do is you have the old dir that doesn't include any information about the region. You can then change the files, the new files, to be placed in a region-aware folder. And then once it's kind of live and all the new files go to the new folder, migrate all the files that you left behind that were put in the kind of region agnostic folder. And in order to provide support for both cases, where the file is in the new region and in the old region, you can have this conditional where you check whether the new directory exists. If yes, then kind of that's where you should look for your files. Otherwise, it probably means that your file hasn't been moved yet. Go for the old dir, but the default behavior is that you already place files in the new directory. And we found very useful, especially to work with large file amount of files, is to use data sync. It's an AWS tool, probably in other providers you'll find something like this as well. And we end up with this beautifully separated file system, which ends up the phase of the preparation and means that we are now ready to go live, to finally deploy that to production. And I have just a few suggestions for you to do it and to actually get the change in place. So first of all, inform your clients about what you're doing. As they will point you to places that maybe you were not aware of, that you need to change, to address. In our case, we need to, for example, adjust payment gateways. That was URLs. So be in touch with your clients. And then planning and preparing for the go live date. First of all, find a low usage time. So probably it will be Saturday, 5 a.m. As an example. So be prepared to wake up early when you go live. Then schedule the maintenance window in advance so users know that something's cooking, something's going to happen. Then, very important, define the go live procedure. On Saturday at 5 a.m., it will be very difficult to figure out what to do. Define steps that will follow almost without any thinking, exact steps that you will follow on the big day. That means include the commands that you need to run, all the checks, all the tests, everything should be in that document, and then assign people to do that. So everyone is aware what's their responsibility and they know what they need to do on the big day. And then define the contingency plan in case things go wrong. So you really don't want to end up in a situation where you go into maintenance window, you do a go big live moment, and then something goes wrong and you end up with messing up with the system for a very long time. Make sure you know how to revert things to how they were before you actually started the go live procedure. And yeah, enjoy the process. It's fun. You've made it all the way down from the stairs. So that last step, yeah, savor it. And in this case, I will also want to mention rehearse. The more times you run it, for example, on your staging, the more times you run it on your local machine, that means splitting the files, the whole go-live procedure, the more familiar and more confident you will. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, but do them before going live. So that's don't wait with the whole process to happen on the go-live. And then as a tool to actually do the go-live, use DNS records. DNS is kind of a connection between what you're doing in your application and, yeah, again, the outer world. So, for example, for the step one, when you have connection to your region-agnostic app URL that points to the previous app, you deploy the new infrastructure. You don't change anything at this stage yet, so everything runs as it was. You have this, that you will point the new URLs to the new infrastructure, but you kind of don't do it intentionally. And now you test that everything that you did works fine, that the containers that you deployed kind of behave correctly. You, for example, write DNS rules on your local machine that point to a specific IP of app 1 and app 2. And only when you're sure that everything works fine and you can use DNS as a trigger, point them, and kind of from that moment on is live. Kind of people will be able to access it. But if you kind of test everything well, you can be sure that it's fine, it's okay. You hope so, at least. And kind of it makes kind of the previous app obsolete and makes you able to delete it, but you can kind of make it as well as a contingency plan. And one last advice for you, if you are going with this whole process and you've done all this hard work to do, please book your holidays for the moment that the go live moment is scheduled, because that means you can pull the trigger in such beautiful conditions on the island next to Stockholm. On 5 a.m. in the beautiful sun. So please, when you go live, make it in style. And that will get you to the happy end with 2 applications, with separated data and clients that actually want to still continue be on your platform. And that's in terms of the content, that's it. I want to just say big kudos to my whole team, because who kind of helped me, help us to get to this stage. Kudos to Charlotte, Leo, Matt, Max, Raul, and Sam. And yep, that'll be it. Thank you. And you can find me on X-Twitter. Yeah, please make sure that you give me maybe some feedback, because that's my first presentation, so really like. And other than that, enjoy the rest of the conference, and it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the presentation. And I have the first question to you, because if I understand you correctly, you promised to your customers that data of these customers will be stored only in the particular regions, right? But data isn't stored only in a database, right? We have monitoring tools, logging, etc. And so, for example, with Datadog, if we have monitoring there, we can store this data in the different regions on that level. But what in case of the business report? I mean, if you would like to aggregate the data from the, like let's say 5 regions, for example, to present it to the business, then you will aggregate them only in one region, right? So you will break this statement to your customers. And also there was one example with the data extraction, like the old tables, and you moved it to the new one. But still in the logs in that region, you still have this data, right? So it's still there. So my question is, how do you deal with this?
Yeah, so in terms of logging and the business reports, that these are the kind of the two first cases. Yeah, so the first case, the logging, we also implement in kind of region specific. So the logging is stored in that particular region. So in that sense, any information does not leave the region. So you need to add it to the pieces of infrastructure that you actually separate and put into the new regions. In terms of the business analytics, yes, you do have the situation where you can get insight into just one region, but not really into multiple. And that aggregation, it's a challenge that we actually haven't faced. And so if I have an answer, yeah, probably see you next year with that answer. And your last question was about
the data extraction and the logs, for example, because in the logs you will still have this customer's data, right?
Yes.
Stored in the different region.
Yeah, so we kind of have this phase where kind of all the data is in the UK, which is fine for now. So we actually, that phase of extracting the tables will happen in that region. And we will end up with the US, for example, data in the UK region, and only then put it into the US. What we really don't want to happen, and we kind of, we need to prevent that, is the UK data reaching the US server, US database. And that's what we don't really want to do. So we only prepare US data in the UK region and only then put it in the new one. That way we kind of keep the situation as it was before at worst.
Okay, thanks. Are there any other questions?
You have mentioned this table renaming thing, and I am wondering why this way. Like, you created a new table, you moved the data, you moved them back, like you created like a fresh image of the old table, and you moved like necessary data. Why just not remove the unnecessary data and just avoid these table renaming migrations and so on?
Yes, so even with the deletion, you need to end up in a situation where you have kind of two different tables to delete kind of the cross-region data. However, what we found out, and this is kind of based on the experience and the test that we did, is kind of in that way, when you just kind of insert and copy the data that is correct, it's way faster than deleting the data. And this is kind of based on the test that we did. So it's a tip kind of from the bottom of our hearts that this is the best way proven in practice to actually make that switch.
Sorry, we need to cut it here. So thanks again.
Thanks a lot.